Hello everybody, it's your Peacekeeper coming at you with the next video in our redo of the How to Play series for the US battleship line. This is the Tier 4 Wyoming class of battleship. There were two ships in the Wyoming class of battleship, the USS Wyoming and the USS Arkansas, both of which are currently represented in this game in various points in the Wyoming class's modernizations. The Arkansas, in this case the Arkansas Beta as they call it in this game, is in the original as-launched configuration for the Wyoming class of battleships. This is also the A-hull for the Wyoming class. The Wyoming herself in the game is in the 1920s modernization. We do not have a 1940s version of the Arkansas, which was, we'll talk about this in a little bit, but the Arkansas was the only one of these ships to serve in combat duty during World War II due to a change in the Wyoming's desired role. Overall, the Wyoming class was an incremental improvement on the preceding Florida class of battleship. The main difference between the Florida and the Wyoming was the addition of another turret, and that would be located amidship, so one of these two middle turrets, for a total of 12 12-inch guns in 6 turrets. This is also the first U.S. battleship to have what they call a torpedo bulkhead incorporated into the design. A torpedo bulkhead is a bulkhead underneath of the main armor belt and more inboard, so that if a torpedo hits the side of the ship but below the main armored belt, there was something there to continue to protect the critical machine spaces of the ship. This is the first class of U.S. battleships to implement that. Also, the design for the Wyoming class actually brought us about the New York class of battleships, as the debate raged as to whether or not this class should have 12-inch guns or 14-inch guns. Ultimately, they settled on the higher velocity 12-inch guns, owing in large part to the belief that most naval engagements would occur at relatively short ranges, where the high velocity offset the heavier round fired by the 14-inch guns at the time. In terms of modifications, in the 1920s, both ships underwent extensive modifications, and they looked exactly as we see Wyoming in the game today. The primary changes, though, aside from the change in superstructure from cage mast to tripod mast, would be the replacement of the original coal and oil-fired boilers with just straight oil-fired boilers, which increased the range as well as the fuel economy of these ships. Didn't do anything to increase the speed, though, as you'll see. The armor profile consisted primarily of a modified incremental armor scheme. Pull up the armor viewer here. Actually, we'll pull up the Arkansas first. The design has a uniform belt thickness all the way from the forward magazine all the way to the last part of the last turret's magazine. However, unlike a proper incremental armor scheme, we do not have the armored belt extending forward of the front armored bulkhead. It does, however, extend back behind the rear armored bulkhead to cover the steering gear spaces. Of course, the Wyoming later received additional torpedo bulges, which cover large portions of the armored belt in this game. Both ships survived World War II, although, as I said earlier, the Wyoming never actually saw combat in World War II. In 1930, Wyoming was converted into an anti-aircraft training ship as a requirement of a naval treaty limiting the amount and weight of battleships. Her main armament was replaced with 5-inch 38 cal dual-purpose mounts, both in the twin mounts that we see on the gearing, as well as the North Carolina and the Iowa for their secondary armament, as well as the single gun mount 5-inch 38 cals that we see on board the U.S. destroyers. Also, in addition to those mounts being added, they added anti-aircraft fire directors, as well as anti-aircraft radar directors, in addition to allow for better training of crews as they proceed on to other ships. The Arkansas herself underwent another modification after this modernization that increased her anti-aircraft complement to 26 20mm Oerlikon mounts and 9 quad Bofors mounts, as opposed to this mix mash of the 76.2mm and 28mm Chicago piano guns. Arkansas participated in the Normandy invasion and provided shore bombardment for troops landing at Omaha Beach, where she was parked a mere 4,000 yards off the beach. Arkansas also served in the Battle of Iwo Jima and Battle of Okinawa, where she also provided shelling support for Marines landing there and endured numerous kamikaze attacks without damage. Wyoming would be decommissioned in 1947 and dismantled. However, Arkansas's fate was far more dramatic. The USS Arkansas, along with a number of other U.S. ships, German ships, and Japanese ships, were all part of the Operation Crossroads nuclear tests at Bikini Atoll. She survived the Able test and was later sunk in the Baker test. The Able test, an airburst nuclear detonation, caused extensive damage to the superstructure, while the armored portions of the ship and the main battery remained relatively undamaged. The Baker test, which was an underwater test, resulted in the complete capsizing of the Arkansas. In fact, if you look at the pictures from the Baker test, you will actually see Arkansas vertical, straight up and down in the picture as the mushroom cloud is forming. When she came back down, she capsized and sank, and she sits at the bottom of Bikini Lagoon to this day. In-game, the Wyomings are mostly a mid- and short-range brawling ship, where their capabilities are most realized is in that sub-10 kilometer range. They are quite maneuverable and relatively well armored when angled. However, nose-on and direct broadside, they have relatively thinner armor profiles and are not as forgiving as other ships in this tier might be. Their guns present a very unique challenge. While there are 6 turrets, the problem that most captains are going to run into is what to do with the number 3 turret, as its gun angles are severely limited by the various bits and bobs on the superstructure of the ship, and as a result, most wise captains will ignore this gun almost entirely unless it is safe to briefly bring it out to bear, because you have to be nearly broadside to fully utilize it. That puts you in a very awkward position to incoming fire, and its use is therefore extremely situational. Also, she has the U.S. standard 21 knots of top speed. It's 20 and a half, but close enough. And as a result, she's quite slow, which, as I said in the previous video, is a unique challenge to the U.S. battleship line, one that requires mastering of pre-planning and forethought in order to effectively utilize this ship. Alright, let's cover the stats. She has 43,800 hit points, an 18% torpedo damage reduction. I'm assuming that is probably a game balance decision, as her torpedo bulges are actually of similar design to what was put on later US standards. That actually was quite effective. As we talked about, the main battery is 12-inch guns. They are located in twin gun mounts. They are in super firing pairs, 2 front, 2 mid, 2 aft. They have a maximum firing range of 14.1 kilometers. However, their dispersion at that range is quite impressive at 201 meters. A lot of people will compare this ship to a shotgun, which is why I said that her best engagement range is right around the 10-kilometer range. In terms of anti-aircraft, for her tier, she has a pretty solid anti-aircraft suite. However, the German battleship actually has slightly better anti-aircraft capabilities, as borne out in the stats. See that video for more information. They do consist of 14 50 caliber Ma Deuces, a total of 24 28 millimeter. I call them the Piano, Chicago Piano, I think is what they were called, as well as 8 of the 76.2 millimeter anti-aircraft guns. Oh yeah, she does have a secondary armament. She actually has more secondary armament in her original configuration. A lot of that is reduced with the upgrade. That consists of 6 5-inch 51 caliber guns in 3 per side. In terms of maneuverability, her top speed is 20.5 knots. That is going to become the standard for U.S. battleships all the way until Tier 7. And then once you get to Tier 8, that upgrades to 28 knots with the North Carolina. She has a turning circle of 590 meters and a rudder shift time of 12.7 seconds, which is a large reason why she's very maneuverable. Her detection range by sea is 13.6 kilometers, and her detection range by air is 9.7 kilometers. In terms of modules, Main Armament Mod 1, the staple of all U.S. battleships. Damage Control Systems Mod 1, a staple of all U.S. battleships. You're going to see those two a lot. Alright, let's go ahead and let's leap into this battle video. If I remember correctly, it comes out to be right around 100,000 damage. Alright, so this match is a Tier 4 fight, and as soon as it pulls up, you'll see that we are at the top of the heap. There are no carriers in this game. However, there are a number of Kaisers that are in this game. As soon as it loads, you'll get to see that. The map is New Dawn, which is one of my favorite maps in the game. Provides you with a good mix of open spaces that you'll see in some of the higher tier matches, as well as islands to get in a good brawl fight with. And of course, as with every single time I've ever played this map in a game, we've all gone to sea, which is pretty much the standard. Nobody likes going to A, probably because I don't know why, actually. Reasons, I'm assuming. I personally don't mind either direction, it's just kind of the way it goes. Usually in the south, they always go to A, but for some odd reason, we're going to C. Because we are a U.S. battleship, and we are all the way at the edge, the far western edge of our team, we are going to favor more towards B. In fact, at one point, we'll actually go almost completely into B. And the reason for that is we want to go ahead and get ourselves in position for where we'll eventually end up being, because since our whole team is going to C, we're going to steamroll whatever is there unless their whole team goes to C. It's just easier for us to hang around B. Plus, as you'll see, as the battle develops, all of their heavy stuff goes to C, with the exception of Kaiser and a Miyogi, which go to A. Their cruisers tend to hang around B. Also, just as a polite reminder, if you are on the forums or even in game, the phrase Jap is considered to be a derogatory term by Wargaming, and it is a violation of their policy on discriminatory remarks, so please avoid using it, racial slur. Please avoid using it in-game if you can. You can call them the Japanese, the Imperial Japanese Navy, etc., but just as a polite heads up. Also, you can kind of see, based off of this part here, the gun angles. In order to bring all of them to bear, you really have to expose a large portion of your broadside to effectively utilize them all. That's not particularly useful. But this does put us into a pretty good position. Like I said, this match is just shy of 100,000 in terms of overall damage. We even get a Dev Strike in here. If you were watching my Z Battles montage number 3, you saw it. I won't spoil it if you haven't, but if you haven't seen that video, please go watch it. It's actually a really good video, in my opinion. I'm not biased or anything. Also, one other thing to keep in mind is, well, this is a particularly good punisher of cruisers. Now, at max range, not so much. You saw the dispersion there. The shot was lined up nearly perfect. Not a single hit, due to the very large dispersion circle. The ship has a really low, what they call sigma value. Sigma value predominantly controls how tight the vertical dispersion is. A higher sigma value gives you a drastically reduced vertical dispersion. The dispersion number listed in the game gives you horizontal dispersion. So another shot out on this Dene, or I guess the first shot out on this Dene. He ducks behind an island, but not before eating an over-penetration and a Citadel hit for 9,130 damage. You can also see this Phoenix and Tenryu are over here. And if you're not familiar with the whole Royal Navy cruiser line, the Phoenix or the Tenryu, all of those ships have particularly soft broadsides. So if they're presenting a broadside to you, engage them with serious conviction and do your best to get good solid hits on them, because They just melt quickly when they get hit by them. There's a St. Louis up there, much more difficult to Citadel. It will take a lot of normal damage, but it is almost impossible to effectively Citadel one of those. You have to be at pretty good range. And dead Tenryu in 3, 2, 1. Dev Strike, Tenryu. Only 8,000 damage, but it doesn't have a whole lot of hit points to begin with. But it just goes to show how soft-sided those ships are compared to, you know, later tier cruisers, which aren't exactly real heavily armored either. You'll also notice that we're putting a healthy amount of islands between us and the enemy's battleships that are to the north. Those ships will do a fairly substantial amount of damage to us if we give them the opportunity to. We've managed to avoid most damage thus far. Of course, here's a Caledon that I was hoping would go broadside to me, but unfortunately he's not going to, so we're going to choose the next best target, which is this Kaiser, who is broadside to me. Now, German battleships are almost impossible to Citadel, so don't hold your breath for getting one. And firing at 12 kilometers, you can see I only got 3 normal penetrations for a rather measly 6,000 damage. Really not that impressive when you think about it. Again, these guns really seem to shine in the close-in engagement. I just, you know, we don't quite get all the way there to show it in this match, but we get pretty close. And, oh, broadside Caledon. She got shots out on him, waiting for the turret. Oh, he gets dev struck. Soft cruisers for the lose. Okay, Danae, maybe? Nah. We got a better target over here, which is this Phoenix, who is presenting a broadside and sailing unequivocally in a straight line. Of course, he's going to turn, but not before accepting another Citadel. We're up to 3 so far in this match, some 10,000 damage taken off of him. We've got his attention, though. He is now coming at us whole hog. And we've got an Isakaze up here that we need to get up there and help. We need to keep him alive, because destroyers are good at capping things, and it would be nice to have him cap A as soon as we thin out some of these cruisers. However, with his current hit points, it's going to be very difficult to do so. So, the Phoenix gives a good feint, starts to open up a little bit. I eat the bait, and we miss, because he turned in. Very good dodge on his part. If you're new to cruisers, pay very, very close attention to what that Phoenix is doing. He ends up surviving far longer than most Phoenixes would at this tier. In fact, I imagine he is probably a high-tier cruiser player who is down here doing God knows what, probably getting win of day on ships. Okay, how about another salvo? Maybe? No, he turns in and we only get 830 damage on an overpen. That is the life of a Wyoming facing a very, very talented Phoenix player. So props to that Phoenix player. He's behind an island now, so we don't really have a good engagement. Unfortunately, I'm going to be dumb and try and ignore this. You can see the icon there that shows that I'm shooting over an island and that the shells are going to impact the island. Figured, he's going fast enough. 1 or 2 of them will get through. Yeah, 2 of them got through and they overpenned, so he has 228 hit points left, and of course I don't have any guns left to shoot him to kill him. So we do all this damage to him, and we don't even get the kill. Got to pay attention to those torpedoes. Don't want to run into those. And then there he goes. So there's Miyogi, there's Kaiser, and of course Danae. Now, of all these ships that are up here, the most juicy of these is definitely this Danae, who is sailing broadside like a complete moron to a battleship. Also, this is a pretty good indicator of just how tight the turning circle is on the Wyoming. We're going to continue to lob shells at him even though he's turning away from us. That last salvo is out. Citadel for the sink. And here you can see just how the maneuverability of these ships work. Also, the one nice part about this ship is that turning circle. The downside to that is, of course, the turrets will not keep up with it in a turn. So if you plan on turning and traversing the turrets, you need to do it early and often. Make sure that you have taken all the effort that you can to get them turning before you start fully committing to that turn. That will help you out a lot in getting the turrets turned so that you don't have to respond to surprises all of a sudden. Lost our Phoenix there to that Kaiser. Fortunately, that island is in the way. We don't have a good shot at him, so St. Louis. Again, very difficult to Citadel of St. Louis. We don't get one here. We just get a bunch of normal pens and over pens for about 5,000 damage. And of course, for some odd reason, and you know, I've had this opinion for a very long time, I honestly feel like ripple firing, that is firing one turret at a time or a pair of turrets at a time, is really not the most effective way to use the guns on a battleship. I just don't find it to be nearly as consistent in getting hits, and maybe it's just because maybe there's not a real change in the number of hits. You can see we left that Kolberg with like 28 hit points. But it doesn't seem like there's a real consistency in the amount of hits that you can get. And I don't know if that's just because I'm shooting at different times that it feels that way, or if it's actually numerically worse due to whatever in-game mechanic is causing it. Here we are getting a bunch of normal pens and over pens, and once again leaving a ship with very low hit points, 180, before it disappears behind an island and gets killed by somebody else. Effectively in this game, we've killed 3 ships that I should have a Kraken right now. And I don't. But, RNG, right? Well, we're kind of left with few choices in our targets here. We have a Kaiser at 12k and a Myogi that's out of our range. I'm going to take my chances with the Kaiser, even though the Myogi is by and far a much better target to kill. They probably could have made that work out. However, I really wanted to test this ship out up against a direct one-on-one engagement with a German battleship, because the US battleship line was the original brawling line. You can see that I angled myself there. We still took 5,000 damage, but we bounced 2 or 3 of his shells in the process. This is probably a little bit more exaggerated of an angle. You could probably get away with being slightly more bow into him to bounce more of his shells. However, I was preparing to use the middle 2 turrets a little bit more effectively. Of course, between each one of these salvos, I am ruddering over to minimize my profile going towards him. There's those turrets going again. Take 3,500 off of him. And we're masking those middle 2 turrets again because they just don't have the angles, the firing angles, to effectively engage him at this profile. But we need to present this profile. This is actually optimal where I'm at right now. And you can see I'm turning, and there we bounced. We did take again some more damage, but you can see I started at least halfway turning as soon as those shells were coming in to bring those guns to bear. Now again, we're not going to bring them all to bear. There is, we'll call it 9,500 damage. But we are once again turning in. Now the problem with trying to engage a German battleship with this ship is that the front bow on a Wyoming is not particularly thick. In fact, you can see here he takes off another about 5,500 hit points just from hitting the front end of the ship. And that's because the lack of that front armored bow is really hurting this ship. And of course his secondaries are going to open up a heck of a lot sooner than mine are. And because his secondaries are a heck of a lot better, we're getting out of dodge. We are going to get out of here. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that the Citadel on the Wyoming is very easy to hit if you know where to aim and if the ship is doing what you want. In this case, I was turning away, and it actually put more of my belt armor in water in front of the Citadel, which was a good thing. Had I been turning the other way and those salvos came in, I would have most likely received a Citadel hit and probably sank. Took off another 8k off of him there in that salvo. You can see that in terms of brawling, it is very, very difficult to take out a Kaiser that is played correctly. However, one thing to note is this ship does do exceedingly well in kiting ships. It's not particularly fast, however, if you remember from the port section of the video, the armor profile, that incremental armor profile, actually is more beneficial towards the back end of the battleship than it is to the front end of the battleship. And you see here I'm taking far less damage from incoming fire in this profile than I was when I was approaching him. We only took about 2,500 that last round that came in. Disabled one of my rear turrets, which is really unfortunate, but it is what it is. He's gone and beached himself because he's not paying attention. Of course, you can see I'm paying attention. Another 1,600 hit points taken off. At this point, I'm not sure I'm going to make it to the end of this. We've got the points, but I very well could die before the end of this engagement. You know, I've got a relatively long 30-second reload. He has a relatively quick, like 20 or 25-second reload. Burning my last heal. We're going to make this count. 94,869 damage. We have all 3 cap points. And he is about to die, but not by my hands. But as you can see, you need to make a commitment at some point in these ships to either commit fully and go into the true knife fight, which with the Kaiser is going to end poorly, or turn and run. In this case, retreat was the more honorable thing to do, so I decided to retreat. And we ended up winning because of it. 94,870 damage, 4 Citadel hits. We got Dev Strike, Dreadnought, and First Blood. In terms of base XP, 1,365. You can see all the damage was done by armor-piercing shells. No secondaries got into that fight. And there's the credit screen. I like the Wyoming. I like the Arkansas as well. They are both great ships to play. Just keep in mind that as a brawler, you're not going to win a one-on-one fight with a German battleship. But it does play well in that 10-kilometer range. Anyway, I'm your Peacekeeper. Like, comment, and subscribe as always, guys. And thank you guys so much for watching.